Ah, dinner parties. A chance to relax, nibble something fancy, and pretend you don't mind small talk about your neighbor's hernia. But in ancient history, dinner parties were less wine and dine, and more who's going to get poisoned, disemboweled, or publicly shamed tonight. Imagine chewing a fig while your host casually murders a rival across the table, or awkwardly sipping goat milk while an emperor recites erotic poetry about himself. Welcome to the original cringe banquets, the most uncomfortable, bizarre, and occasionally fatal dinners you'll never RSVP to. And yes, someone definitely brought a liar. If you love awkward silences, ancient gossip, and historical train wrecks you can't look away from, subscribe, like, and settle in. This dinner party just started, and you're already late. Let's be honest, when you think dinner party, you probably imagine candles, maybe a slightly overcooked chicken, and someone trying too hard to pair the wine. At worst, your evening ends with mild indigestion and an existential crisis about your friend's opinion on NFTs. But in the ancient world, a dinner party was basically Game of Thrones with a salad course. Social status, seduction, philosophical debate, the occasional public execution, and that was just the appetizer. This is not the kind of party where you show up fashionably late. No, in ancient times, being late could literally get you uninvited, or worse, seated near the dog, and not metaphorically. There was a literal dog under the table, eating better food than you. Let's travel back, way back, to a time when the seating chart wasn't just passive-aggressive, it was legally binding. Whether you were reclining on a plush couch in Rome, huddled on a floor mat in Greece, or clutching a stale hunk of barley in medieval France, your place at the table told the entire room exactly who you were. Wealth, influence, number of limbs, it was all visible the moment the bread arrived, or didn't. In Roman conviviums, for example, you could be invited to a dinner party and still be treated like the help. Imagine showing up freshly bathed and perfumed, only to be led to the cheap seats, a literal bench in the corner, where the only thing you're served is a judgmental side-eye from someone named Lucius. If you were a freedman, you were fed last. If you were a woman, you weren't reclining. If you were poor, you weren't invited. You were the entertainment, and probably on fire. But let's not give all the credit to Rome. Ancient Greek symposia, the OG think tanks of the wine world, were equally strange. Picture this. You're sipping watered-down wine. Yes, watered down, it was barbaric to drink it straight. Trying to impress your neighbor with a quote from Homer, when suddenly a flute girl starts twerking next to your pitta. You nod, smile politely, and internally panic, because you forgot whether it was your turn to toast, philosophize, or wrestle. In medieval Europe, dinner was less about intellectual stimulation and more about survival. The lord of the manor sits at the high table, gorging on swan and spiced wine, while you, a humble knight without land or dental care, gnaw on a dry crust of bread, and pray you're not about to be conscripted into another war. Bonus points if your chair doesn't collapse under the weight of 12 layers of chainmail and sadness. And then there were the real killers, the unspoken rules. Oh, the rules. For instance, don't recline on the wrong elbow. Don't speak before the host does. Don't eat too fast. Don't eat too slow. Don't, under any circumstances, mention politics, unless you were trying to die of poison before dessert. Which, let's be honest, was usually some form of dried fruit and regret. It wasn't just that these dinners were awkward, it's that they were minefields. Social hierarchies were baked into every bite. Who got served what, when, and on which plate mattered more than the actual food. There were rules about posture, about eye contact, about how many olives you could take without looking greedy. Entire careers were launched or destroyed based on whether you burped in front of the wrong patrician. In ancient Persia, guests at royal feasts would sometimes be tested, offered wine, watched for signs of disloyalty, and asked philosophical riddles mid-meal, just to make sure their minds hadn't been dulled by lamb and luxury. In China, a misplaced chopstick could signal either cultural ignorance or a declaration of war, depending on which dynasty was in charge. Let that sink in. Dinner, something you probably do in your pajamas while scrolling through memes, was once a life-or-death performance, a test of loyalty, manners, and gastrointestinal control. And speaking of sinking in, imagine reclining on a banquet couch after several goblets of honey wine, only to realize the guy next to you is vomiting in a golden bowl, not because he's sick, but because he's making room for more food. This was actually a thing. The ancient elite called it conspicuous consumption. We call it a frat party, but with more silk. Even entertainment was loaded with danger. You might have jesters juggling knives, poets performing erotic odes to their patrons, or, in some cases, gladiators staging mini-duels between courses. Who needs dinner theatre when your dessert comes with dismemberment? But don't get too comfortable yet. We haven't even touched on the ancient fear of poisoning. Ah, yes, the perennial dinner party concern. Hosts hired professional tasters, guests brought their own wine testers, and some nobles just didn't eat at all, preferring to sit and look mysterious, because nothing says suspicious like someone who declines the roast goose 3 times. And if you're thinking, surely they wouldn't kill someone over appetizers, allow me to introduce you to the concept of political purging via pastry. We'll get there. But for now, know this. In history, a shared meal was rarely just about food. It was power, performance, and paranoia, with a side of pomegranates. So as we dive fork first into history's most awkward, bizarre, and straight-up cursed dinner parties, remember your worst modern dinner experience. Cold lasagna, uncomfortable chairs, an ex who won't stop talking about cryptocurrency is still better than being force-fed goose liver by a singing emperor. Take a deep breath. The candle's lit, the wine is poured, and someone's already planning a betrayal across the table. Welcome to the feast. Imagine you've been invited to a fancy Roman dinner. You put on your cleanest toga, the one with only mild sweat discoloration, splash on some imported Egyptian perfume that smells like spicy olives and wealth, and head off to the domus of Gaius Maximus. Something or other. You're hungry, optimistic, and just a little bit drunk already because pre-gaming with wine and stale chickpeas was the custom. Then you get there, and immediately it becomes clear you are not important. You're ushered through the main atrium, past marble statues and fountains that exist purely to remind you that your entire house could fit in this man's vestibule. A slave gestures toward a cramped little couch near the far end of the dining room, the triclinium. You notice the other guests, senators with oil-slicked hair and smug expressions, are reclining front and center, practically being fanned with palm leaves and praise. Their goblets are already being refilled. One has grapes, actual grapes. You, meanwhile, have barley bread, and it's stale. This is the Roman convivium, part dinner, part social calculator. Your seating isn't random. It's a public announcement of your status, your value, and in some cases your estimated expiration date. Senators get front row couches, knights and minor officials hover on the periphery like forgotten parsley. Freedmen, formerly enslaved citizens who dared to dream, are seated so far from the food they might as well be in another zip code. Our story tonight follows one such freedman, Gaius Licinius Primus. He's nervous, overdressed, and trying to look like he belongs. Spoiler, he doesn't. This is his big night. He's managed to score an invite to a convivium thrown by a wealthy patron who owes his fortune to marrying rich and blackmailing a governor. Gaius believes that if he can just network well enough, maybe he'll be bumped up to the central couch next time. Maybe someone important will remember his name. Instead, Gaius finds himself seated next to a man named Balbus, who smells like pickled fish and keeps trying to sell him novelty phallus sculptures. The conversation is awkward. The food, once it arrives, is humiliating. Let's talk food hierarchy. At a convivium, dishes didn't just vary by taste, they varied by status. The main couch got the good stuff: roast duck, seasoned dormice, mulled wine that didn't taste like regret. Gaius and his fellow background characters got barley bread, turnip paste, and a bowl of suspicious olives that looked like they'd been weeping. And the worst part, everyone knew these banquets weren't private affairs. They were spectacles, performance art. With meat, guests compared their portions. If you were served 3 figs while someone else got 6, it meant you'd fallen out of favor. If your wine was watered down while your neighbor got the expensive Falernian, you might as well pack up your toga and rethink your life. Gaius, bless his heart, tries to make conversation. He compliments the host's choice of silverware, comments on the quality of the mosaic floor. The senator next to him chuckles, then pointedly asks if Gaius owns any property yet. The silence that follows is long. Someone coughs, a slave refills the wine. But then, drama. At the height of the meal, a philosopher stands up. His name is Flavius Petronius, and he's 2 amphorae of wine, into a rant about how Roman society is hollow, materialistic and obsessed with appearances. He gestures wildly, knocking over a plate of lentils. A hush falls. The host narrows his eyes. Now you'd think this would be the cue for an awkward apology and a retreat into obscurity. But Flavius keeps going. He critiques the seating arrangement. He denounces the entire idea of status-based service. He declares that the man seated nearest the vomitorium, a certain Gaius Licinius Primus, is more noble in spirit than any of the corrupt aristocrats lounging in the centre. The crowd gasps. Gaius freezes. Half the room turns to look at him. The other half pretends not to notice, in case this turns into something actionable. And then the host smiles. Slowly, too slowly. He raises a goblet and says, "Perhaps our philosopher would enjoy proving his humility by tasting the wine first." Now, this is Roman code. When someone says taste the wine, they don't mean tell us about the mouthfeel. They mean, if anyone's about to get poisoned, let it be the loudest guy in the room. Flavius pauses. The air thickens. Even the fig wasps hold their breath. He drinks. Nothing happens. Well, not immediately. He finishes his cup, bows dramatically, and resumes his seat. The tension lifts. A few nervous laughs ripple through the room. Gaius exhales and tries to chew his barley with dignity. But 20 minutes later, Flavius is carried out by 2 slaves, unconscious. Possibly just drunk, possibly not. The feast continues. And Gaius? He stays quiet for the rest of the evening, says nothing more about silverware, doesn't touch the olives. He watches the senators joke and boast, trading favors like they're collecting amphora lids. He realizes slowly, with each bland bite, that the convivium isn't just a dinner, it's a ladder, and the lower rungs. They don't get dessert. Let that sink in. You show up to dinner thinking you're a guest, only to discover you're part of the set dressing, and if you complain, well, there's always the wine. As the evening winds down, Gaius excuses himself early. No one notices. His seat is refilled before the door closes behind him. Welcome to the Roman convivium, where status was served first and taste came second. If it came at all. Step into the domus or rear, Nero's palace, which is less a home and more a cry for help in marble form. The ceilings shimmer with gold leaf. Perfume sprays mist the corridors. The dining room rotates, literally rotates. So you can chase the sun while eating grapes peeled by a eunuch named Claudius, who once worked in accounting. This isn't just dinner, it's psychological warfare, but with better lighting. Tonight's menu features roast peacock, dolphin-flavored jelly, yes, you read that correctly, and the deep, unsettling groan of an emperor who is about to sing. Nero, the Roman Empire's very own theatre kid, with unlimited power and zero shame, believes himself to be not just a god, but also a misunderstood musical genius. Like if Canio and Caligula had a toga baby. Now let's meet our dinner guest, Lucilla, a senator's daughter dragged to this cursed buffet of ego and oysters. She's 23, exhausted, and trying to maintain the correct facial expression, a delicate blend of polite awe and total emotional numbness. She's made the rookie mistake of sitting in the direct eye contact zone, right across from Nero's performance days. Yes, there is a daze. Yes, there is a liar. Yes, you are absolutely trapped. The first hour is relatively harmless. There are acrobats. Someone releases live birds indoors. The senator chokes slightly on a shrimp tail, but recovers with the help of 3 slaves and a slap from his wife. Normal Nero things. Then the lights dim, or rather, the torchbearers shuffle awkwardly to their positions and extinguish the excess flames. It's time. Nero steps onto the platform, dressed in embroidered silk, so sheer it qualifies as a visual assault. He holds a lyre in one hand, his ego in the other. The room hushes. No one breathes. Somewhere in the distance, a flute player faints from sheer anticipation. Nero begins to sing. To say his voice is bad would be an insult to geese. It's not off-key so much as anti-key, like every note personally wronged him, and now he's getting revenge in falsetto. The subject of the song? Himself. Naturally, it's a tragic ballad about how the gods don't understand him, women envy him, and architecture submits to his will. Halfway through, he makes eye contact with Lucilla. Now, in any other setting, you could look away, maybe feign sudden interest in your cup of wine, but here, that's how you die, politely, with a poisoned fig. So Lucilla smiles. Not too broadly, that looks fake. Not too subtly, that looks suspicious. It's the same expression you make when your boss tells a joke at the holiday party and you need your paycheck. And then, horror of horrors, he sings directly to her. The lyrics pivot into improvised couplets. Something about her eyes being brighter than Apollo's chariot. Something about how she sits like Venus, but with more taxation rights. It's both poetic and deeply confusing. Someone in the background tries to clap. They're immediately silenced with a glare from Nero's eunuch-in-chief. By the time the song ends, 20 minutes later, which feels like 20 years in hostage time, Nero bows. The applause begins. Not naturally, but strategically. Guests glance around, waiting to see who will clap first. The prefect of the Praetorian Guard starts slow, building to a crescendo of synchronized adoration that would make a North Korean parade look casual. Lucilla claps. She smiles. She shouts bravissimo because it feels Italian enough. And then, disaster. The young poet named Marcius, full of wine and misplaced confidence, chuckles out loud. The room freezes. Nero's head tilts, like a hawk spotting prey. He steps down from the platform, lyre still in hand, walks slowly toward Marcius. Everyone pretends to look at anything else. The mosaic floor, the ceiling, the philosophical emptiness of their own lives. Marcius tries to backpedal. I was laughing with joy, he says, trembling. It was divine. Nero doesn't blink. He says nothing. Instead, he hands Marcius the lyre, just hands it to him, and walks away. Now, this isn't a gift, it's a test. Marcius, sweating, does the unthinkable, he sings. It's a short song, about goats. He stumbles through it, voice cracking like cheap pottery. He finishes. No one claps. Nero claps once, then says, "Let us never speak of this again," which in Roman means speak of this again and you'll be buried alive with your own scrolls. Dinner resumes. Lucilla stares down at her roast peacock, which now feels like the least absurd thing in the room. She wonders, briefly, if it's worth trying to leave, but then she remembers what happened to the last guest who left a party early. His body was found in the Tiber with a "thank you for coming" note stapled to his chest. So she stays. She chews in silence. She watches Nero eat grapes one at a time while dictating a new poem to a terrified scribe. Every once in a while he hums. That night, Lucilla goes home and stares at the ceiling for 4 hours. The sound of Nero's singing loops in her head like a curse. She dreams of lyres and blood. This is what dinner looked like under Emperor Nero. Performative flattery, public panic, and just enough wine to make it all feel like a bad fever dream. So next time you find yourself stuck at a family dinner while your uncle explains crypto in interpretive dance form, remember, at least you're not being serenaded by a sociopathic emperor with creative control and execution privileges. Could be worse. Could be Nero. The Greek symposium. Equal parts wine-soaked lecture hall and socially sanctioned therapy session, but with more oil, less clothing, and a flute girl named Thalia, who absolutely does not get paid enough for this. If you're imagining a chill dinner party with a few olives and casual talk about democracy, stop. This was Plato meets Vegas. Ancient TED Talk, by way of frat house. Tonight's gathering is hosted by Demetrios of Corinth, who has recently come into money via extremely suspicious shipping contracts, and would now like to appear cultured. His villa smells of honeyed figs, anxiety, and overcompensation. The couches are arranged in a tight horseshoe around a crater the size of a bathtub. The wine, already diluted, because Greeks, unlike Romans, didn't trust anyone who drank their wine undiluted. Too barbaric, too much like Thracians. And we don't talk about the Thracians. Demetrius is eager, sweaty, and trying to hide the fact that he doesn't actually read Homer. His guests tonight are a mix of respectable citizens, upstart thinkers, one disgraced tragedian, and a young man named Cleon, who brought a pet monkey on a leash for philosophical symbolism. We'll get back to that. The symposium begins with the usual, light conversation, compliments on sandal craftsmanship, and some mild gossip about the local stonemason, who's allegedly sleeping with the wife of the temple treasurer. You know, just intellectuals. Then, the real fun starts. The wine flows freely, and so do the ideas. Demetrios kicks off the discussion with a bold, confusing question. What is virtue, really? Everyone nods solemnly. as though this hasn't been debated since Pythagoras was in diapers. A philosopher named Leandros begins to speak, slowly, with dramatic pauses and too much eye contact. He's the kind of guy who uses 10 syllables when one would do. Across the room, a rival philosopher, Socrates Minor, not that Socrates, this one sells olive oil and bad metaphors, groans audibly. "Virtue is balance," he announces, pointing to his own wine cup like it's a sacred relic. Too much courage becomes recklessness. Too much reason becomes cowardice. Too much you becomes unbearable. Someone mumbles into a fig. No one claims it. The room chuckles. The tension simmers. Meanwhile, Thalia the flute girl plays a seductive melody in the background, trying very hard not to make eye contact with the man who keeps requesting songs from the good Dionysian era. She's already danced twice and spilled wine on a sophist who then claimed it was a test from the gods. She's done. Then, in the back corner, Cleon's monkey escapes. Chaos. Furniture is upended. Wine is spilled. The monkey climbs the host's decorative bust of Athena and defecates, symbolically or otherwise, on her forehead. The symposium pauses as Demetrios awkwardly tries to maintain his air of dignity while also chasing a monkey in sandals. Leandros, seizing the moment, declares this a metaphor for democracy. Unruly, unpredictable, controlled by lesser minds. Cleon, who's still nursing a black eye from last week's gymnasium brawl, fires back. At least the monkey doesn't write boring tragedies, which, to be fair, is true. Let that sink in. Ancient intellectuals, revered for centuries, once screamed at each other while a monkey pooped on religious iconography. History, folks. It's messy, but things aren't done unraveling yet. Demetrios, desperate to regain control, proposes a recitation contest. Everyone must recite a poem from memory. The winner gets nothing, just public approval, and maybe a better seat next time. Leandros recites something overwrought about seafoam and the divine ache of longing. Socrates Minor gives a rousing, if clearly improvised, ode to olives. Then it's Cleon's turn. He stands, he sways, and he delivers a surprisingly heartfelt and shockingly erotic passage from Sappho, directed entirely at the host's cousin. The room holds its breath. She blushes. Someone knocks over the crater. Wine floods the floor like Dionysus weeping in a bathhouse. The symposium ends, as it always does, in laughter, minor injuries, and philosophical resentment. Demetrios declares it a success. He thanks everyone for their contributions to virtue and understanding, while quietly instructing a servant to never ever invite Cleon again. As the guests shuffle home through marble courtyards and the stillness of late Athenian night, some are drunk, some are enlightened, and one guy is still trying to explain the monkey thing to a passerby. Here's the thing about Greek symposia. They were brilliant, chaotic, and deeply human. You had politics, poetry, existential dread, and excessive body oil, often within the same sentence. You were there to test ideas, to drink, to argue, to wrestle. Sometimes literally, you were there to push the boundaries of civility, just far enough that the gods didn't smite you, but your dinner companion probably wanted to. So the next time someone invites you to a wine and philosophy night, just remember, the Greeks did it first, and weirder, with fewer clothes, and far, far more monkeys. Let's set the scene. Alexandria, Egypt. The palace glows like a jewel under the warm Mediterranean moonlight. Palm trees sway, incense wafts, and somewhere inside, a eunuch is frantically arranging gold-plated dinner plates while hoping no one notices that the roast ibis is still partially frozen. Tonight's host? Cleopatra VII. Yes, that Cleopatra. The one with enough charisma to unseat kingdoms and enough dramatic flair to make Broadway look like amateur hour. She's throwing a dinner party, but not just any dinner party. This one has a theme: make the Romans uncomfortable. Mark Antony is here, of course. Drunk, shirt open, flexing like he's auditioning for a statue. He's been trying to impress Cleopatra for weeks. She's entertained, mildly, like a cat watching a beetle crawl across the floor. The other guests? A smattering of Roman officers, Egyptian nobles, Greek intellectuals, and one confused merchant from Cyprus, who only came for the wine and is now praying no one asks him a philosophical question. And the food? Ah, you sweet modern soul. You think you've had exotic cuisine? Cleopatra's table looks like a surrealist painting. salted mullets stuffed with honeyed dates, pigeon tongues dipped in rosewater, jellied eels moulded into the shape of the Nile. And the wine? Spiced, perfumed, and possibly enchanted. No one knows anymore. But this isn't about the food, it's about the performance. The lights dim, or rather the slaves douse half the torches in a way that feels theatrical, yet mildly dangerous. Cleopatra rises, draped in transparent linen and gold-threaded silk. She looks less like a monarch and more like a religious hallucination. The room hushes. She holds up a goblet, swirling something that definitely smells like fermented mango and vinegar. "Let us contemplate the nature of wealth," she says, through the art of dissolution. And then she drops a pearl, a real one, the size of a thumbnail, into the goblet. The vinegar fizzes. The pearl dissolves. Slowly, everyone leans in. Some gasp. Mark Antony pretends to understand the symbolism. He does. Cleopatra drinks the whole thing without blinking. Mic drop. Now this wasn't just a weird party trick. It was a calculated political message. The pearl, one of the most valuable in her royal collection, was sacrificed not out of madness, but to remind everyone in the room, "I am so rich, I can drink jewelry. What are you bringing to the table?" Let that sink in. You bring a bottle of Merlot to a potluck. Cleopatra drinks the GDP of a small city-state and calls it a conversation starter. The Romans are rattled. They're not used to this kind of spectacle from a woman, especially one who speaks 8 languages, quotes Plato mid-toast, and casually uses seafood as performance art. But Cleopatra isn't done. Dinner clears. The entertainment begins. No jugglers, no dancing boys, no cheap acrobatics. Instead, she performs a dramatic reading, in ancient Greek no less, of Euripides' Medea. She plays all the parts, every single one, including the children. The lighting is moody, the delivery is intense, and when she reaches the climax, Medea murdering her children in a fit of justified vengeance, she locks eyes with a Roman senator and whispers, "Some stories still resonate, don't they?" The senator blinks, slowly, like a man realizing he just brought a salad to a knife fight. Meanwhile, Antony is clapping too early and too loudly, trying to show support while quietly wondering if she actually meant any of that. The room is a mix of awe, terror, and indigestion, and the drama doesn't stop there. As the guests retire to the couches for dessert, candied lotus root and honeyed almond paste, if you must know, a messenger arrives. He kneels, whispers something in Cleopatra's ear. Her face darkens. Everyone freezes. A rival general has insulted her in the temple marketplace, calling her a painted puppet of the Romans. She smiles. Slowly, then calmly announces dessert will be delayed. I must rewrite a few verses. Half the room doesn't breathe for a full minute. This is Cleopatra's brand of hospitality, part divine spectacle, part veiled threat, part one-woman show. You don't just eat, you bear wit. Mark Antony, still trying to impress her, tempts a toast. He stands, wobbles slightly, and proclaims, "To the goddess who walks among us, may she never run out of pearls." It lands. Barely. Cleopatra nods. And for a moment, just a flicker, she looks genuinely amused. Later, as the party winds down and guests filter out into the velvet Egyptian night, the air is thick with awe and confusion. One senator swears he saw Cleopatra levitate. Another claims the pearl trick was done with wax and sleight of hand. But they all agree on one thing. It was the most uncomfortable, unforgettable dinner of their lives. And Cleopatra? She sits alone in the empty hall, sipping wine from a goblet shaped like a crocodile. She stares into the distance, already planning her next masterpiece. Maybe something involving flamingos and political assassination. Who knows? The lesson? Never underestimate a queen who knows how to weaponize dinner theatre. So next time your dinner guest breaks into spoken word poetry halfway through the risotto, just smile. And be grateful they didn't poison your figs. Imagine you're invited to dinner by Genghis Khan. Yes, the guy who conquered most of Eurasia before you finish your morning coffee. The man whose business card probably just read, Genghis, world domination, no appointments necessary. So when you get the invite, you don't say no, you say what time, and would you prefer I arrive groveling or trembling? You ride into camp beneath a sky that feels too wide for comfort. Steppe winds howl like hungry wolves. A ring of yurts sits around a fire that could roast a village. Horses outnumber people. And somewhere nearby, someone is screaming, either in song or agony. It's genuinely hard to tell. A soldier gestures for you to enter the central yurt. You duck inside and are immediately hit with the aroma of fermented mare's milk, sweat and lightly burned goat fat. The interior is sparse but strangely elegant. Rugs made from animal skins, bone carvings of past victories, and in the center, Genghis Khan himself, dressed in fur and silence. He doesn't speak. He nods. That's your cue to sit. To your left, a general is already gnawing on a sheep bone like it owes him money. To your right, a poet, yes, even the Mongols had poets, is delicately sipping aireg and trying to pretend he's not seated next to a man currently cleaning his nails with a dagger. And then, the food begins. Now, Mongol cuisine wasn't exactly known for its variety. You've got meat, you've got more meat, and if you're lucky you've got something that used to be meat but now resembles soup, because someone dropped it in a boiling pot and forgot about it during a battle. The appetizers include horse intestines, lamb stomach stuffed with onions, and something suspiciously described as warrior's delight, which might be spleen, or horse brain, or both. You eat, because not eating might be considered an insult, and Genghis is watching. Then comes the fermented mare's milk, arag. It's sour. It's frothy. It tastes like yogurt that went to war and came back with PTSD. But you drink it. You make a face. Genghis smiles, which is somehow worse than if he had glared. Now, enter our cautionary tale. A young warrior named Orjan, fresh from his first victory, keen to impress, overdoes it on the arag. He laughs too loud, slaps a general on the back, tells a joke about a goat that does things no goat should do. The table goes quiet. Genghis raises an eyebrow. This is it. The moment. The tension hums like a drawn bowstring. And then, Orjan vomits. All over the rug. Right in front of the car. Time stops. Let that sink in. You are seated at the table of the most powerful man on earth. A man who has toppled kingdoms and made emperors cry. And you've just defiled his carpet with a steaming gift from your stomach. There's a pause. Genghis looks down at the mess. Then back up. He says nothing. Just gestures. 2 guards appear, drag Orjan outside. We never see him again. Someone casually lays a new rug down. Dinner continues. No one mentions it. And no one drinks quite as much areg after that. This was the Mongol feast experience. Equal parts communal bonding and mortal peril. It was how loyalty was tested. How warriors bonded. How hierarchy was enforced without ever raising a voice. Everything meant something. Who got served first? Who sat closest to the Khan? Who got the choicest cut of meat? Usually the fatty part, which was considered the best. If you got tendon soup, it meant you were trusted. If you got raw liver, it meant you were being evaluated. And if you got nothing, well, you probably wouldn't need another meal anyway. The atmosphere wasn't all death and dread, though. There was laughter, songs, storytelling around the fire. Genghis himself, when in a good mood, was known to tell dirty jokes involving steppe animals and imperial officials. There was even a game involving ankle bones of sheep, rolled like dice to predict fortunes or determine who had to drink the next bowl of slightly terrifying curdled mystery. But make no mistake, everything, the seating, the food, the games, was political theatre wrapped in goat fat. You weren't just attending a feast, you were proving your place in the empire. One wrong move, and you were either demoted, exiled, or quietly erased from the guest list, and from history. Modern comparison? Imagine attending a company Christmas party hosted by a billionaire CEO who once conquered a rival startup with actual swords. The wine is kombucha, the hors d'oeuvre raw liver, and someone disappears every time they complain about the bathroom situation. That was dinner with the Mongols. And yet, there was a strange beauty in it. The openness of the steppe, the brutal honesty of the food, the clarity of a culture that didn't pretend, that used its feasts, not just to nourish the body, but to declare power, enforce loyalty, and tell everyone exactly who mattered, and who, well, did. As the feast winds down, Genghis rises. He says a few words, something about the sky spirits and horse breeding, and departs. The rest follow his lead. No applause, no dessert, just the quiet creak of leather boots on dirt, and the low, contented belch of a man who survived another dinner without offending anyone important. Outside, the stars stretch endlessly overhead. You breathe in the cold air, heavy with smoke and something slightly equine. You're alive. You're full. And you still have all your limbs. Congratulations. You just survived a Mongol dinner party, but maybe skip breakfast tomorrow. You've received an invitation, well, more like a command scrawled on damp parchment, to attend a royal banquet in 13th century England. You're told it will be a feast of great magnificence. You imagine roast meats, spiced wines, maybe a lute or two, strumming gently in the background. You bathe for the first time in a month, brush the lice out of your best woolen tunic, and make your way to the great hall. And that's when the disappointment begins. The hall is grand. Yes, in that built entirely out of damp stone and poor life choices kind of way. There are torches burning fat slicked smoke into the rafters. Long wooden tables sag under the weight of crusty bread, unlabeled meats and flagons of wine that taste like wet barn. At the far end, raised on a dais, is the high table, where the king and his noble entourage sit. They are surrounded by golden cups, embroidered linens, and a small army of servants ready to butter their partridges at a moment's notice. You are not at that table. You are seated behind a pillar, with the other, lesser guests. Local knights, visiting friars, that one guy who insists he's a baron but smells aggressively like fermented cabbage. You squint at your plate and realize that meat is being a bit generous. It's more of a suggestion, possibly rat-adjacent. Speaking of rats, one just scurries across the table. Boldly. It pauses, sniffs your crust of bread, looks disappointed. Moves on. You sigh. This is a medieval banquet, a celebration of abundance, for some. The further you sit from the high table, the more your food resembles punishment. Up close, the nobles are feasting on stuffed swans, spiced peacock, and gravy, so thick it could hold a trebuchet. You, on the other hand, are trying to identify whether the dish in front of you is fish, fowl, or just something unfortunate that drowned in gravy yesterday. But what really steals the spotlight, aside from the general dysentery vibes, is the entertainment. First, the jesters. 2 of them, dressed in motley, juggling turnips and flinging insults at the crowd. At first it's fun, then it gets personal. One spots you and shouts, "I've seen fresher faces on a battlefield corpse." Everyone laughs. You smile politely. Inside you die just a little. Then come the mummers, actors in elaborate masks who perform a confusing skit involving a goose, a fake monk, and a bucket of leeches. No one really understands it, but everyone claps when the leech bucket gets thrown. That's just banquet etiquette. Still hungry? Too bad. You watch as dishes arrive at the high table, like exotic offerings to minor deities. There's roast boar, complete with apple in mouth. There's eel pie, carefully braided. There's a tower of custards shaped like a castle. Meanwhile, your table gets another round of bean surprise, which isn't surprising at all because it's just beans. Let that sink in. You travelled miles through muddy roads, dressed in your best flea-infested cloak, sat through a play where a guy pretended to marry a goose, and your reward is boiled legumes and casual humiliation. Cheer. Then comes the dancing. Not you. You don't get to dance. You get to watch other people dance. The noblemen perform a slow, shuffling pattern of movements that barely qualifies as choreography, but somehow still manages to look smug. One lady spins twice, sits down, and everyone applauds as if she's rewritten the laws of gravity. You look over at the kitchen door. A young servant rushes out with a platter of roasted game hens, nearly trips, recovers, and is slapped by a steward anyway. Someone near you mutters that they've seen 3 servants disappear tonight alone, possibly thrown into the moat for sneezing. And the worst part, the banquet isn't even about the food, or the music, or the awkward poems about St. Cuthbert, recited mid-meal. It's about showing off. Feudal banquets were theatre, pure pageantry. The noble class wasn't just feeding themselves, they were feeding the myth of their superiority. Every gilded cup, every roasted deer carried in on a spit, every singer imported from Normandy. It was all part of a carefully choreographed performance. The message was simple. We are rich, you are not. Now pass the goose or get out. Even the mess was a power move. No plates for you. You eat off a trencher, a slab of stale bread that doubles as both dish and sponge. After you're done, the trencher is thrown to the dogs. Or the poor. or the poor dogs. It depends on the mood. And yet, weirdly, there's a strange comfort in it all. Despite the hierarchy, the hygiene nightmares, and the jester's alarming jokes about your mother, there's a rhythm, a familiarity, a chance to glimpse the glittering, grubby machinery of medieval life. As the night winds down, someone blows a horn. No one knows why, and the nobles begin to rise. You take this as your cue to slink out into the chill night air, belly half full, dignity quarter intact. Behind you, the music fades, replaced by the sound of servants scraping bones from the floor and sweeping up what's left of the goose-monk play. You step over a drunk knight sleeping in a barrel, and you realize something important. At least the rats didn't laugh at you. It's the Renaissance. Rome is gleaming again, draped in silk and spiritual dread. The Vatican is the beating heart of power, part holy sanctuary, part Game of Thrones reboot with extra incense. And tonight, in the papal palace, dinner is being served. But not just any dinner. This is a papal banquet, an evening of sanctified gluttony, rigid etiquette, and the kind of social anxiety that could cause spontaneous canonization. The guest list: cardinals, bishops, ambassadors, and one terrified scribe who doesn't know how he got invited, but is currently pretending to enjoy quince paste like his life depends on it, because it kind of does. The host, Pope Alexander VI, aka Rodrigo Borgia, a man whose hobbies include nepotism, extremely confident hair choices, and reminding everyone that God loves a cheerful giver, especially if they give property, gold, or influence. He's seated at the head of a polished walnut table longer than a confession line during Lent. His robes shimmer, his rings shine, his smile does not reach his eyes. Let's talk rules. At your average Renaissance dinner party, you might worry about forks or napkins. Here, you worry about existing incorrectly. You must sit in the right order, touch nothing until the Pope does, do not spill, do not speak unless spoken to, and for the love of St. Peter, do not fart. No, really. Flatulence, along with sneezing, belching, hiccuping, or involuntary eye-twitching, is strictly prohibited. Not for moral reasons, for aesthetic ones. The Church believes beauty and order are divine, and nothing says chaos like a bishop losing a battle with boiled cabbage. Now meet Cardinal Bonifacio, elderly, devout, and tragically lactose intolerant. He's been served a heavy cream stew as the second course. He tries to politely push it aside. A steward appears. The steward frowns. The bowl is gently nudged back toward him, as if God himself insists he eat it. Bonifacio sighs. He. You can feel the tension mounting in his intestines. So can he. Across the table, a visiting Florentine ambassador is deep into a monologue about how Venice is overrated. No one cares, but everyone nods, because disagreeing during soup is a sin. Meanwhile, a mute jester, yes, a jester who doesn't speak by papal order, is juggling candied figs in the corner, looking like he's silently contemplating revenge. The Pope dips a spoon into his saffron broth. The entire room follows suit, like synchronized swimmers in cassocks. A single misstep could be political suicide, or real suicide. You just never know with the Borgias. Then it happens. Bonifacio's eyes widen. There's a twitch, a shift. He coughs, not because he's ill, but because he's weaponizing sound. Strategic noise deployment. A classic maneuver, but the Pope notices. His Holiness pauses, slowly lowers his spoon. The room holds its breath, which is ironic, given what just occurred. And then, salvation. From the opposite end of the hall, a loud crash. A tray of wine has hit the floor. A young friar, clearly nervous, has tripped. Red liquid blossoms across the marble, like a martyrdom painting. Gasps ripple through the room. Servants rush in. The moment is broken. Bonifacio exhales. In every sense. Let that sink in. A man may have just sacrificed his ecclesiastical career, so another could release gastrointestinal pressure in peace. That's fellowship. But the tension isn't over yet, because the soup course is followed by garlic pigeon, a highly aromatic dish, best enjoyed at a distance and never on a date. One of the more politically ambitious cardinals, let's call him Cardinal Spina, takes a bold bite. He chews, slowly, too slowly. Then he looks up, right at the Pope. Delicious, he says. The Pope raises an eyebrow. Indeed? A silence falls over the garlic. Now, this might seem like a compliment, but in Vatican dinner diplomacy, calling a dish delicious before the Pope comments on it is like declaring yourself Messiah at open mic night. It's presumptuous, borderline heretical. The Pope lets the moment linger, just long enough for Spina's hands to start trembling. Then he smiles. Delicious, he echoes. Everyone exhales. Crisis averted. But only just. Meanwhile, the mute jester has begun miming a very disturbing puppet show involving a heretic and a roast duck. No one knows what it means, but it's oddly moving. Dessert arrives. A tower of almond pastries sculpted into the shape of St. Augustine's face. It's slightly terrifying. One of the monks sneezes, instantly regrets it. A servant whispers something to the Pope. The monk is quietly escorted out. No one ever sees him again. But at least the pastries are good. As the banquet draws to a close, the Pope raises his goblet. To divine order, he says. To divine order, the guests reply, in unison. And they mean it. Because after 3 hours of fear, forced elegance and strategic bowel suppression, order is the only thing keeping this dinner from descending into a theological riot. Later, the guests leave in silence. Some are sweating. One is quietly weeping. The jester has vanished. Bonifacio clutches his stomach like a man who just survived the siege of Jerusalem. This is what it meant to dine with the papacy in the Renaissance, to eat in constant performance, to navigate etiquette so dense it might as well be written in Latin hexameter, and to know that behind every glass of wine, every polite nod, every compliment about the texture of roasted pheasant, someone was watching, judging, taking note, and maybe poisoning the salad. So next time you're at a formal dinner, and someone says grace for a little too long, remember this. At least you don't need a papal bull to excuse a burp. Imagine arriving at a dinner party where the menu includes tamales, cacao, honeyed insects, and the distinct possibility that someone will get sacrificed before dessert. Welcome to Tenochtitlan, capital of the Aztec Empire, where dinner wasn't just food, it was cosmic performance art, with spiritual consequences and truly questionable after-dinner activities. Tonight's host is an elite priest-noble hybrid named Teotihuacán. His chin is freshly oiled, his feathered cape screams "I outrank you," and his courtyard glows with flickering torches and the low hum of ceremonial flutes. The obsidian knives, polished, the corn beer, fermented, the air thick with anticipation and just a hint of chili. You're seated at a long mat, cross-legged, surrounded by flower garlands and solemn stares. Bowls of steaming pozzolo are passed around. Yes, that delicious maize stew. But historically, this particular pozzolo might have had some special protein added during certain festivals. We'll just leave that there. Everyone is behaving. Quiet. Respectful. Not because they're bored, but because the man sitting at the head of the gathering has the power to flay people alive and call it community service. Let's talk courses. You begin with roasted squash blossoms. There's a side of axolotl which looks like a happy lizard, but tastes like fish that once had dreams. Then come roasted grasshoppers dusted with lime and chili, which are surprisingly delicious and deeply crunchy. It's refined, intricate food. Honestly, 5 stars on pre-Columbian Yelp. And then comes the corn. Not just any corn, this is ceremonial corn. Blue, red, white, yellow, every color, every kernel, a cosmic symbol. You're told the gods bled for this corn. You're now trying to decide whether to chew reverently or just try not to choke on the symbolism. The meal proceeds in calm waves. Sweet tamales wrapped in banana leaves, smoked turkey with epazote, and thick bitter cacao poured into painted clay cups. A noble woman beside you swirls hers with a small jade spoon, whispering a prayer to Calciutlikie, goddess of rivers and domestic harmony. You mirror her gesture. Badly, she glares. But beneath all the spice and solemnity is the ever-present buzz of expectation, because you know, everyone knows, that this isn't just a dinner. It's part of the Tlaquexipihuelisti festival. Translation? The flaying of men. Sounds festive. And that means sacrifice. Now meet Yael, a captured warrior from a rival city-state, dressed in ceremonial feathers and uncomfortable levels of body oil. He's tonight's guest of honor. He's seated separately, draped in flowers, and being treated with eerie kindness. Everyone knows what's coming, including him. But for now, he's sipping cacao and discussing the maize harvest like he's not hours away from being offered to Huitzilopochtli via rooftop autopsy. Let that sink in. This culture served you tamales, then served someone's soul to the sun, dinner and a show. If your idea of a show includes arterial spread, there's no panic, no gasps. The Aztecs didn't view this as horror. It was necessary. Sacrifice sustained the cosmos. Without blood, the sun might stop rising. And honestly, who wants to be blamed for that? The priest-host stands. His voice booms. He thanks the guests for honoring the gods with their presence. And now, as tradition demands, invites them to witness the sacred offering. Guests rise. Cacao cups are set down. Flower garlands are adjusted. Nautal is led away with great ceremony and the kind of dignity typically reserved for Nobel laureates or retiring basketball players. You, however, are not emotionally prepared for what follows. But you follow the group out into the courtyard, up the temple steps, past stone carvings depicting past sacrifices in exquisite, anatomically correct detail. At the summit, drums beat, flutes trill, the high priest raises his blade, and as the sun hits its zenith, the ritual begins. No one screams, except possibly you. Internally, after the offering, there's a moment of reflection. Then, this being an Aztec event, there's dancing. Yes, dance. A conch shell is blown, and guests sway in slow, deliberate movements, honoring the gods, the sacrifice, and perhaps the fact that no one else was chosen to star in tonight's finale. Eventually, you're handed another cup of cacao. It's thicker this time, spicier. You drink it in silence, overwhelmed by everything. The pageantry, the conviction, the contradiction of exquisite hospitality and breathtaking violence. Because here's the truth. Aztec dining was never just about nourishment. It was ritual. It was cosmic order, served on a banana leaf. It was honor, hierarchy, and theology distilled into mole sauce. And it forces a question, one that lingers as you descend the temple steps with trembling knees and a belly full of sacred corn. Would you enjoy dessert more if it might be your last? That was the unspoken heartbeat of the Aztec feast. Every bite could be a blessing, or a final courtesy. So next time your dinner party gets weird because someone brings vegan wine to a barbecue, just remember, at least no one's getting flayed on the patio. Welcome to a Viking feast. Not a quaint gathering with horned helmets and light pillaging, but an actual Norse banquet, equal parts drinking contest, battle reenactment, and aggressive storytelling with a 60% chance of sudden bloodshed. You arrive at the longhouse just after sunset. The air outside is ice-kissed and smells like pine, wet fur, and something that probably used to be a goat. The longhouse glows with firelight, roaring like the belly of an ancient beast. You duck through the thick wooden doors and enter a world of smoke, sweat, and semi-coherent chanting. The table is a battlefield. Not metaphorically, literally. It's been hacked up so many times that someone tried to reassemble it with iron nails and prayer. Men and women crowd around it, dressed in wool, leather, and pride. No forks, no manners, just hands, knives, and hunger. This is not a place for salad. Tonight's host is Eric Skullsplitter, known for his 3 marriages, 5 axes, and complete inability to hold his mead. He's seated at the head of the hall, already drunk, already yelling. His beard has recently caught fire and been extinguished with ale. Everyone cheers. Let's talk menu. The food is unapologetically carnivorous. Smoked lamb, roasted seal, charred reindeer, and mystery stew that might contain mushrooms or someone's foot. Bread exists, but only as a vehicle for soaking up fat. Vegetables are seen as suspicious. The closest thing to seasoning is ash from the fire, or whatever was stuck to the meat when they found it. And then there's the mead. Oh, the mead. Sweet, strong, and served in quantities best measured by barrel. It flows endlessly, like the gods themselves are trying to black out before dawn. The goal isn't to sip, it's to enjoy. Next to you sits a young warrior named Thorleif. He's 18, anxious and armed. He's here to prove himself, not in battle, but in the feast. Because for Vikings, the dinner table is the proving ground. Tonight, Thorleif will either earn his place in the saga, or vomit into a shield and be mocked until Ragnarok. Eric calls for silence, or tries to. It takes 3 horn blasts and a minor brawl to calm the room. Then, with all the gravitas of a man who once punched a priest for sneezing during a toast, he begins the first bragging round. This is tradition. Guests, take turns telling stories of valor, conquest, or really impressive beard growth. They shout, boast, insult each other's lineage, and occasionally break into song. Think of it as Norse karaoke, but with more threats and fewer lyrics. Thorleif stands. It's his turn. He launches into a tale about chasing down a thief who stole his father's ox. It's not a great story. The ox got away. The thief turned out to be his cousin. Still, he embellishes, adds a bear, claims lightning struck his sword, ends with a dramatic flourish that involves choking on a turnip. Polite silence. Then, laughter. Not the good kind. Someone throws a rib bone. Someone else challenges him to a homgang. A ritual duel. This escalates quickly. 2 benches are cleared, shields are brought. A circle is drawn with goat blood. Everyone starts chanting like this is the halftime show at the apocalypse. Thorleif wobbles to his feet. He's not ready. He knows it. Everyone knows it. But backing out? Not an option. So he picks up a blunt sword, mutters a prayer to Thor, and prepares to be humiliated. Then something incredible happens. He wins. Barely. Stumbles. Slips. But his opponent, a boastful older warrior named Halfdan the Loud, catches his foot on a tankard, falls flat, and Thorleif, somehow, lands on top with his sword pressed to Halfdan's chest. The hall explodes. Thorleif is hoisted into the air, mead sloshed onto his head, beard kissed by 3 very drunk shield maidens. Eirik declares him a man of worth, despite the turnip thing. Someone starts composing a saga verse on the spot. It includes a questionable rhyme about goat butter, but no one minds. Let that sink in. In Viking society, one clumsy moment at dinner could change your reputation for life. Glory wasn't reserved for the battlefield. Sometimes it started in a puddle of spilled stew and ended with your name shouted over a bonfire. The feast continues. Toasts are made. Oaths are sworn. Someone challenges the fire pit to a duel. It loses, and as dawn begins to paint the sky with cold light, the mead dwindles, the food disappears, and the guests collapse on benches, on furs, on each other. Outside, the wind howls like a mourning god. Inside, Eirik snores so loud the rafters tremble. Thorleif sits quietly by the dying embers, cradling a cup of mead like it holds his entire future. And in a way, it does. Because in Viking culture, the feast was more than just a party. It was memory. Identity. Proof that you belonged, not just in the hall, but in the story of your people. So next time someone spills wine at Thanksgiving and starts crying about their thesis, be gentle. You never know who might be writing their saga. Still watching? Then you know what to do. Like, subscribe, and raise your mead horn to Thorleif, patron saint of accidental victories and turnip redemption. If you thought ancient dinner parties were stressful, try surviving a Tang Dynasty tea banquet, a symphony of ceremony etiquette, and the constant risk of social obliteration if you bowed 3.2 degrees too far to the left. It's 9th century Chang'an, capital of the Tang Empire, arguably the most cosmopolitan, glittering, poetry-obsessed city on the planet. You've been invited to a tea banquet hosted by Minister Zhao Wen, a man so powerful he once demoted someone for chewing too loudly near a scroll. The garden is absurdly perfect. Carved stone bridges, night-blooming flowers, cranes that look like they've studied ballet. A string of silk lanterns hangs from peach trees, casting everything in a golden glow that says, "Be impressive or perish." Tonight's guests include poets, scholars, aristocrats, and one court musician who keeps coughing into his sleeve like he's hiding something contagious or rebellious. You are seated near the koi pond. This is either an honor or a trap. You don't are. The first rule of a Tang tea banquet: everything is a test. Your robe, too bright, and you're seen as vulgar. Too muted, and you're mistaken for a monk. Your poem, too long, and you're a narcissist. Too short, and you're uncultured. Your tea pouring technique, oh, we'll get to that. Minister Zhao enters with the grace of a man who has never sneezed in public. He bows, exactly once, exactly the right amount, and signals for the tea to begin. Now this isn't tea like you know it. It's not tossed into a cup with a cute infuser shaped like a cat. No, this is tea preparation, a spiritual warfare. The leaves are crushed into a powder, whisked into hot water, and poured into celadon cups, so thin they practically hum, The servants move with the precision of assassins. Each cup must face the right direction. The handle, if it even has one, must not be touched. Ever. You are handed your cup. You do not drink yet. First, you admire it. Quietly, you comment on the aroma. Something like, notes of orchid and old mountain rain. You have no idea what that means. It doesn't matter. Everyone nods approvingly. Then comes the poetry. One by one, guests recite original verses inspired by the tea. Some are stunning. One noblewoman compares the steam to ghosts escaping heaven's teapot. Everyone applauds. Another guest tries a metaphor involving monkeys. He is not applauded. He is noted. Now meet Cheng, a young scholar, eager to impress. He's been practicing his verses for weeks. He's wearing a robe he can't afford. He bows deeply, too deeply, then clears his throat and recites. From leaf to soul, this cup imparts the whisper of jade, the ache of hearts. Not bad. A little dramatic, but this is the Tang dynasty. Being emotionally overwrought is practically mandatory. But then, disaster. Cheng sits down and in a fatal act of hubris, slurps his tea, audibly. The table freezes. Minister Zhao does not blink. He merely sips his own tea, silently, and places the cup down with the finality of a guillotine. Let that sink in. One slurp, and Cheng's future in government service is now about as stable as a rice paper umbrella in a typhoon. Slurping, in this context, is a sign of impatience, of gluttony, of not being able to delay gratification for the sake of harmony and respect. You might as well show up to a funeral chewing garlic. The servant behind Cheng subtly shifts position. Not to attack, but to record. Everything done here tonight may be reported later. After all, if you can't maintain dignity while sipping tea, how can you govern a province? The evening trudges on. A new course is served. Candied lotus seeds and plum blossom jelly, so delicate they might disintegrate under your gaze. You take one bite. You do not react. Reacting is for commoners and actors. You simply nod and whisper something about seasonal grace. You are learning. Meanwhile, Cheng sits very still, sweating. A poet beside him whispers a consoling couplet, which somehow makes it worse. Then comes the final round of tea. The rarest brew of all. Snow-picked white tea from Mount Mengding. It's been steeped precisely 12 seconds. The cup is passed like a sacred relic. Minister Zhao raises his pause. He speaks. Let this cup remind us, he says, that restraint is the highest virtue in life, in poetry, and in flavor. A dagger of a line, dipped in civility and aimed squarely at Cheng. The room bows. The banquet ends. Cheng will not be invited again. As you step out into the cool night air, your stomach lightly lined with poems and jelly, you exhale. You survived. You didn't slurp. You didn't over-rhyme. You are, by Tang Dynasty standards, a success. But you'll never look at tea the same way again. Let that steep for a moment in a world where empires balanced on etiquette and image. A single sip could define your fate. So next time you're at a cafe, and someone criticizes your latte art, just smile. At least your political career doesn't depend on foam. It's 453 AD, and you're attending a royal wedding feast. Not just any wedding, mind you, but the wedding of Attila the Hun, destroyer of cities, scourge of Rome, and wearer of surprisingly fancy pants when the occasion demands it. Tonight, he's marrying yet another wife. His seventh, eighth, honestly, no one's keeping track, except the terrified scribes. The tent is massive, stitched from layers of embroidered hides and trembling expectations. Smoke from cooking fires coils into the night sky like nervous thoughts. Outside, warriors sharpen blades for fun. Inside, musicians strum tunes that sound suspiciously like war cries played in a minor key. The guest list includes Hun chieftains, Gothic warlords, diplomats from dying empires, and one poor Roman emissary who's desperately trying not to wet himself every time someone yells "Skål." Let's talk about the food. Boiled meat, baked meat, roasted meat, raw meat. If you're lucky, you'll get a side of cheese, so fermented it could file for citizenship. Vegetables are theoretical, bread is optional, knives are mandatory, the mead flows freely, thick, spiced and strong enough to erase memory, and possibly moral responsibility. And then there's Attila. He sits at the center, not on a golden throne, but a simple wooden chair. His crown? Modest. His cloak? Fur-lined but blood-stained. The man had wealth beyond imagining, and yet chose to dress like he just rolled out of a battlefield, because intimidation pairs well with mystery meat. He doesn't laugh, he smirks. Occasionally, when someone toasts him, he nods, nothing more, because Attila doesn't need to perform, he simply is. Let's meet the bride. Ildiko, a young Gothic woman of noble lineage and extremely questionable luck. She's draped in white and visibly trying not to pass out. Attila toasts her with a grunt. She curtsies. Everyone cheers like this is adorable, not ominous. The evening drags on in a haze of meat grease and martial poetry. Warriors recite tales of conquest, blood, and that one time Attila allegedly made an entire city surrender by scowling at it. Someone juggles hatchets. Someone else arm wrestles a goat. You clap politely and try not to make eye contact with the guy gnawing on a boar skull. Then comes the toasting. Every chieftain must raise a horn and honor the groom. One by one, they stand, offer increasingly unhinged compliments to the sword that sings, to the man who eats lightning and farts thunder. Attila responds with silence or, if they're lucky, a slight tilt of his head. And now comes one Jasius, Attila's top advisor, professional flatterer, and full-time sycophant. He raises his cup, grins like a wolf, and delivers a toast so thick with praise it practically curdles the mead. To Attila, he bellows, who stands above the Caesars, who drinks from the cup of fate. Attila interrupts with a raised hand. Enough. One Jasius sits. Let that sink in. The man who raised entire cities without blinking now finds flattery excessive. That should tell you everything about this crowd. Eventually the music dies down. The meat runs low. People start passing out, pairing off, or collapsing in the corner with a turkey leg as a pillow. Attila rises. No speech, no grand gesture, just a low grunt and a nod toward his tent. He disappears with Ildiko. The party continues until morning. At dawn, the camp stirs. Someone is snoring into a horse trough. Someone else is gently on fire. The smell of smoke and hangover permeates the air. And then the whisper starts. Attila is dead. The rumor spreads like wildfire. Dead? How? Poison? Treachery? Sorcery? Roman plot? No, officially, and brace yourself for this. He died from a nosebleed. Yes, really. The story goes that Attila, in the throes of wedding night passion or just a particularly hearty meal, suffered a sudden nosebleed. Drunk, asleep, and lying on his back, he choked on his own blood. No battle, no betrayal, just sinus failure. Historians still argue over it. Maybe it was poison, maybe a heart attack, maybe his death was staged to look natural so his enemies wouldn't dance on his grave. But one thing is certain. The man who terrified empires died quietly, anonymously, in the middle of his own feast, while the meat was still warm. The camp erupts in confusion. Some mourn, some panic, others immediately begin plotting. Because when a warlord dies, succession isn't guaranteed. It's fought for. His body is laid out in state. No one touches their food. No one dares speak loudly. The man who commanded armies without shouting now commands reverence in death. A triple coffin is made. One of gold, one of silver, one of iron. Legend says the grave diggers were executed to keep the burial site secret. That's right, the guy couldn't even rest in peace without turning it into a murder mystery. But here's what sticks with you. Not the death, but the eerie contrast. One moment, laughter, meat, mead, music. Next moment, silence, dread. The realization that even the strongest man in the world can choke on his own blood while wearing a wedding tunic. So the next time your dinner party feels awkward because someone brought up politics or your uncle won't stop describing his gallbladder surgery, remember at least no one died face first in cake. Attila did. It all starts with a dinner party, as most disasters do. This particular gathering takes place on Mount Pelion, in the glittering shadow of the gods, where mortals dare not tread, unless they're invited. And in this case, no mortals are invited. It's the wedding feast of Pelos and Thetis, two very important figures in Greek mythology. He's a heroic mortal king, and she's a sea goddess with commitment issues. Their union is supposed to symbolize harmony between gods and men. Instead, it becomes the birthplace of one of the most famously unnecessary wars in human history, and all because someone didn't get invited. Enter Eris, goddess of discord, patron saint of mean girls, known for her ability to ruin a vibe faster than a phone call from your boss on a Sunday night. Eris, being left off the guest list, responds not with a polite RFE decline or a passive-aggressive Facebook status, but with a golden apple. She crashes the party, lobs the apple into the crowd, and walks off. No explanation, no apology, no speech, just one engraved message. To the fairest. And just like that, this becomes the worst dinner party in Olympus history. 3 goddesses immediately claim the title: Hera, queen of the gods, and low-key world domination enthusiast. Athena, goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare with a mean glint in her eye, and Aphrodite, goddess of love, beauty, and emotionally complicated side quests. The gods, being the wise overseers of fate and cosmic justice, do the responsible thing. They pawn the decision off on a random Trojan prince named Paris. Because that's what you do when eternity's at stake. You outsource. Now pause with me here. A mortal man. 3 divine women. 1 impossible choice. This is not a setup for a heroic tale. This is the mythological version of a group text spiraling out of control. Paris, who, let's be honest, has the judgment of a wet sponge, is told to choose who's the fairest. Each goddess offers him a bribe. Hera promises political power, kingdoms, empires, global influence. Basically LinkedIn Premium, but divine. Athena offers wisdom and victory in battle, the Greek equivalent of a lifetime military-industrial complex subscription. And Aphrodite? She offers him the most beautiful woman in the world. Helen of Sparta, Paris hormone-blinded, and clearly not thinking about international consequences, picks Aphrodite. Because why settle for empire or glory when you can go full simp for a married woman? So now we come to the actual dinner. Helen is married to Menelaus, king of Sparta, but Paris arrives under the very flimsy pretext of diplomatic friendship. He's invited to a Spartan feast, treated like royalty, toasted with wine, and sat directly across from Helen, who by all accounts is intelligent, poised and so stunning that people write epics just trying to describe her cheekbones. The tension? Palpable. Menelaus, clueless and mid-bite into a lamb shank, makes the classic husband mistake. He assumes things are fine. Spoiler, they are not fine. Somewhere between the second course and dessert, Paris and Helen exchange lingering looks. You know the kind. The eye will eventually ruin several civilizations for you kind. At some point, Helen smiles. Paris blushes. Menelaus burps. And just like that, the stage is set. In the days after, Paris either seduces or abducts Helen. Ancient sources are hazy, depending on which misogynistic scroll you ask, and sails back to Troy with her. Menelaus wakes up to find his wife, and a good portion of his political dignity, missing. Cue dramatic lighting, thunderclaps, and the birth of a war that will last 10 years, and kill thousands. All because of one flirtatious look and a golden apple that no one even ate. Let that sink in. The greatest military saga of the ancient world, Achilles' rage, Hector's honor, the fall of Troy, the Trojan horse, all of it, starts not with a siege or a crime, but a party with bad judgment, worse wine, and the worst seating arrangement in divine history. Can you imagine that wedding planner? Okay, we've got the gods on this side, the goddesses over here, and we absolutely do not invite Eris. What could go wrong? Everything. Now, we often think of myths as grand, operatic tales full of fate and destiny, but if you strip them down, they're intensely human. Petty jealousy, social snubs, people fighting over beauty contests, and dinner parties that turn into disasters. Because behind every war, every epic, every fall of a city, is a moment that could have been stopped if someone had just said, hey, maybe don't throw the apple, or let's seat Hera and Aphrodite at opposite ends, or even, maybe don't flirt with the guest of honor's wife over wine and lamb. But they didn't, because pride is louder than reason, and dinner parties, whether on Mount Olympus or in suburban backyards, always bring out the worst in people when they're hungry and insecure. So the next time you think your family holiday dinner is awkward, Remember, at least it hasn't started a decade-long siege yet. Imagine sitting down to a 5-course meal where every bite might kill you. Welcome to the Ottoman court, a place where the carpets are velvet, the chandeliers are gold, and the appetizers are potentially lethal. Because if you're dining with the Sultan, you're not just a guest, you're a participant in a culinary trust fall where the floor is laced with political tension and actual poison. Let's set the table. Topkapi Palace, 16th century. The air smells like roasted lamb, honeyed almonds, and just a touch of paranoia. The Sultan, say Suleiman the Magnificent, because why not make it fabulous, is reclining on silk cushions, surrounded by eunuchs, poets, diplomats, and rivals. Everyone's smiling, no one is relaxed. That's because dinner at the palace isn't just food, it's theatre. And you're in the front row clapping politely while scanning the room for tasters. If the guy who sampled the soup keels over, politely pass on the lentils. Now here's the twist. Being invited to this banquet is an honor. A dangerous, sometimes final honor. You've been summoned because you're important. Or suspicious. Or both. This is Game of Thrones with better tailoring and an 87% higher chance of decorative impalement. Tonight, the main dish is lamb stew infused with saffron, rosewater, and existential dread. The Sultan lifts his spoon. Everyone waits. Then, a tester steps forward. Silent, solemn, trembling slightly, and sips first. Silence. A beat. He doesn't die. Relieved glances are exchanged. The spoon moves. The guests eat. Still, you chew cautiously, slowly. Because yes, you made it to the dinner, but will you make it out? Midway through the meal, it's time for entertainment. But this isn't your average lute player or belly dancer. No, this is Karagöz and Hachivat, the iconic shadow puppets of Ottoman satire, and tonight, they are not here to play nice. Behind a linen screen, the puppet master begins. The voices change pitch. The puppets leap and twirl in the firelight. The plot? Ostensibly a light-hearted moral fable. But beneath the jokes, there are jabs, biting political references that feel a little too specific. Hasivat, oh great vizier, how wise you are. If only your ears were as big as your appetite for bribes. Cue the room's collective inhale. Was that about the Grand Vizier? The vizier chuckles. A bit too loudly. You glance at him. Is that sweat? Is his left eye twitching? You suddenly realize you're holding your breath like you're trying to win a staring contest with death. Because here, at this table, words can be daggers, laughter can be lethal, and the puppets? They know everything. Now to soften the paranoia, more wine is poured. Not that it helps. In fact, it raises more questions. Who poured it? Was the bottle already opened? Is it rude to request a wine taster on the third glass? But etiquette is as sharp as the kitchen knives. You don't refuse the Sultan's vintage. You sip, smile, die quietly, if necessary. Reflective pause. Imagine attending a dinner party where not being poisoned counts as a successful evening. Now compare that to your Aunt Carol's passive-aggressive potato salad. Perspective. Back at the table, someone compliments the lamb. The Sultan smiles faintly. My mother's recipe, he says. No one knows if that's true, but everyone murmurs, appreciation like they've just tasted divine revelation. Even the meat sweats feel sacred. Then comes dessert. Candied rose petals, melon slices arranged in geometric patterns, and halva so sweet it could make a janissary weep. The tension lightens, just slightly. You dare a second helping. Life is fleeting after all. But just as you think things are winding down, the Sultan claps. 2 guards appear. The silence falls heavier than the velvet drapes. One guest, a minor pasha with too much eyeliner and not enough political savvy, is escorted out without a word. He'd made a joke earlier. Something about taxes. Or was it turbans? No one's sure. No one asks. He's never seen again. Let that sink in. You could be sipping fig sherbet 1 minute, and disappearing into the Bosphorus the next, simply for bad comedic timing. That's the thing about Ottoman banquets. Elegance and fear held hands. The porcelain plates shimmered with gold, but everyone at the table knew the price of missteps. Every nod, every compliment, every laugh was calculated. You weren't just eating, you were performing. And those who forgot, they became lessons. Quiet ones. Still, there's a strange serenity to it. Because in this world, power isn't just flexed through armies or palaces. It's served, spooned, and sweetened. It's layered into every dish, whispered in every toast, and shadowed behind every puppet's punchline. By the end of the evening, you've survived. You bow. You thank the Sultan. You walk backwards slowly, reverently, toward the exit, your stomach full and your nerves utterly destroyed. Outside, the night air hits you like mercy. You lived through dinner. For now. There are two types of dinner guests in feudal Japan. Those who memorized the etiquette scroll beforehand, and those who now wish they'd stayed home and eaten rice crackers in shameful silence. Tonight, you are the second kind. Welcome to a daimyo's banquet, a ceremonial dinner so wrapped in protocol that even sneezing incorrectly might cause a diplomatic incident. Tonight's host is Lord Kato, a regional powerhouse known for three things: exquisite taste, an unhealthy obsession with ritualized politeness, and having executed a man for scratching his nose at the wrong time during soup service. The scroll of etiquette you received upon arrival is 97 rules long. 97. That's not a typo. And none of them are obvious. For instance, Rule 14, do not look at your rice directly unless you are about to consume it, and only if the host's chopsticks are not in motion. Rule 42, never point your chopsticks vertically in your bowl, unless you are actively praying for the soul of your dead host, which is ideally not the current one. You take your seat, low cushion, stiff knees, ceremonial robe that feels like it was tailored for a particularly fashionable scarecrow. The room is quiet, peaceful, terrifying. Tatami mats stretch out in perfect geometric silence. Incense swirls like judgment in the air. Across from you sits your translator, a young Korean envoy, here to establish goodwill between courts. He smiles nervously. You nod back. Both of you are doing your best impersonation of calm statues, except your statue has indigestion from earlier stress eating dried squid. The meal begins. First course, clear soup with a floating chrysanthemum petal. Lovely. Except, wait, you forgot whether the first sip comes before or after you compliment the host's seasonal flower arrangement. Rule 6 or 7. You panic. Say nothing. Sip the soup. The host clears his throat. You die a little inside. Now, the second course, grilled eel, on lacquerware plates that cost more than your house. You turn to the envoy. He fumbles his chopsticks, a cardinal sin, and in a flurry of panic, jabs the fish wrong. The chopsticks make a clack. Everyone hears. There is a pause. The room freezes. Lord Kato smiles. The kind of smile you might give a horse before shooting it for breaking its leg. The envoy bows, fast, deep, desperate, muttering apologies in perfect court Japanese. You join in, just to be safe. Who knows? Maybe you'll get points for solidarity. But the host merely sips his tea. Judgment will come later, probably in the form of politely worded exile. Speaking of tea, it's the third course. Matcha, whipped to frothy perfection, served in a bowl cradled like a newborn deity. You lift it with both hands, bowing slightly. You sip, not too loud, not too long. Success. And then comes poetry, because of course there's poetry. The fourth course is seasonal verse. Literally, a court poet stands to recite a haiku about plum blossoms in winter. The room hums with admiration. You're expected to respond with a complimentary poem of your own. You resist the urge to quote something from a fortune cookie, and instead whisper a clumsy haiku about snowflakes and regret. You're not sure if it was acceptable or if you just metaphorically compared the host's honor to a muddy road. Let that sink in. You came for food, and now you're improvising metaphors in a foreign poetic structure while balancing pickled radishes and your dignity. And then, the sake. Oh no. Sake is offered in tiny cups, poured not by servants but by fellow guests. This is both a gesture of politeness and a test. You must pour for others before refilling your own, but only after they've done the same for you, except if you're senior in status, or younger, or from a foreign court. No one really knows. It's like etiquette Jenga. Except if the tower collapses, you lose a treaty, and possibly your head. Midway through, your translator leans over and whispers, "I think I insulted his ancestors," or "Maybe I complimented his koi pond too aggressively." You nod. That track. Still, the food is divine. Delicate slivers of sashimi, gently smoked duck breast, artfully shaped rice balls that look like minimalist sculptures. Each bite tastes like it was prepared by a monk with a PhD in umami. You chew with reverence. Then comes the rice finale, the most sacred part of the meal. You place your chopsticks down just so, you incline your head. You wait, and then, you sneeze. It's silent. But it's there. A tiny puff of betrayal escapes your nostrils at the exact moment the host is giving a closing speech about harmony and the eternal balance of nature. The room stops. You feel every eye like a blade. Your soul begins drafting its own apology scroll. But then, the host chuckles. Just barely. A mercy laugh. Others follow. Nervously, you bow. Again, until your spine threatens mutiny. Somehow, it's forgiven. You survived, by the grace of a sneeze, and maybe the gods of awkward diplomacy. As dessert arrives, sweet red bean paste, sesame balls, and plum wine, you breathe. Not deeply, just in, because you realize now. This wasn't a meal. It was a ritual, a dance of status, subtlety, and deeply suppressed social panic. A ballet of bowls and bows where one misstep can upend alliances or initiate vendettas lasting generations. And yet, it's beautiful. It's theatre. It's political ballet with chopsticks. You leave the banquet lighter. Not just from the 1400 calories of artful gastronomy, but from the strange exhilaration of having survived it. Politeness, you realize, can be its own kind of battlefield. And you? You lived to tell the tale. Barely. Paris. Mid-18th century. A place where powdered wigs were taller than moral humility, and dinner parties weren't just about food. They were about ego, intellect, and humiliating your rivals with a well-placed bon mot while nibbling on a wedge of Roquefort. Welcome to the Enlightenment Salon, the French answer to what if dinner was also a cage match, but with Latin references and camembert. Tonight's host is Madame Geoffran, patroness of thinkers, gossipers, and the kind of men who write 300-page treatises on human nature but can't boil an egg. She hosts weekly salons, where Voltaire flirts with revolution, Diderot unpacks philosophy with the enthusiasm of a caffeinated squirrel, and Rousseau, well, Rousseau mostly tries not to cry into his cheese. You've been invited as a guest, a minor noble, a footnote in a powdered wig. But you're seated, which means you matter, until of course someone quotes Cicero incorrectly, and the mood shifts from spirited discussion to bloodless execution by dessert. Tonight's theme? The tension between reason and emotion. You know, light stuff. As the first course, a delicate consommé, because of course it is served. Voltaire already has a napkin tucked under his chin, and a quip ready in his mouth. Rousseau, he begins casually, I read your latest treatise. Tell me, did you cry while writing it, or just afterward? Laughter ripples. Soft, controlled, dangerous. Rousseau adjusts his cravat. He smiles. It's the kind of smile that says, yes, I would rather eat glass than be here, but society has rules. The wine flows. Red, dry, with notes of judgment. And then, the debate begins in earnest. Diderot waxes poetic about knowledge and the freedom of man. Voltaire counters with precision, sarcasm, and the moral flexibility of a snake in silk stockings. Madame Geoffran fans herself, theatrically. The cheese is sweating, so is Rousseau. And now, you foolish, you ask a question. Don't both reason and emotion have a place in philosophy? The room pauses. Voltaire blinks. Diderot tilts his head like a hawk spotting a limping rabbit. Rousseau beams. Finally, someone who gets it. And then he begins. He stands dramatically. He clutches a linen napkin like it's the last flag of a dying republic. Man, he declares, is born free. And yet, everywhere, in these salons, in these endless dinners, he is in chains. A small silence. You hear a fork clink against porcelain. Madame Geoffran's smile has frozen into a rictus of, please don't ruin the pâté with political despair. But Rousseau is off. Like a carriage with broken wheels on a cobbled street of raw emotion. He rants about hypocrisy, about inequality, about how reason has turned into a velvet cage, and how dinner parties are just metaphorical prisons with soufflé. By the end of it, he's red-faced, teary-eyed. And yes, his wedge of cheese is a little damp now. Diderot leans forward, calm, calculated. "Dear Jean-Jacques," he says, "if you hate society so much, why do you always show up for the fish course?" Laughter, icy, perfectly timed, like the guillotine of wit. Rousseau sits, slowly, quietly, his face a storm of betrayal and bechamel. He picks up his wineglass, hesitates and then sips. The universal symbol for I'm fine. Everything's fine. This is fine. Let that sink in. These were the men shaping revolutions. These were the voices influencing democracy, freedom, and reason. And they were one sarcastic toast away from flipping a table over a comment about goat cheese. And somehow, it mattered. These dinners, absurd, awkward, theatrical, were the birthplace of ideas that would burn through monarchies like a dropped match in a powder room. By dessert, Rousseau has excused himself. Something about walking in the moonlight to realign with nature. Translation, he's emotionally overwhelmed, and probably muttering about Voltaire's smug face under his breath. You stay behind, fork deep in a tart so delicate it could file for diplomatic immunity. Madame Geoffron leans over. "He'll be back," she says. "He always is. Just don't ask him about childhood trauma next time. Or theatre. Or Geneva." Noted. As you leave, the candlelight flickers over half-eaten plates and empty wine bottles. The smell of butter and bruised egos lingers in the air. You step into the Paris night, head spinning, not from the wine, but from the knowledge that dinner can be a battlefield, a parliament, a church, and a boxing ring, all in one. And the casualty? One man's pride, lightly salted and served with a side of satire. Sometimes the most brutal dinners don't need daggers, just cutting words, and a little too much cheese. Let's end where the world, arguably, began again, with a dinner. Not just any dinner, a quiet evening in a borrowed upper room. 13 men reclining at a table, bread, wine, heavy glances, and a silence so thick you could spread it like butter. This is the Last Supper. The dinner party that launched 1,000 paintings, a global religion, and a conspiracy theory or two about the seating chart. Unlike Nero's chaos or Rousseau's cheese meltdown, this meal didn't have a jester, a roast ox, or an overambitious seating plan, but it had something those other feasts never managed: prophecy, betrayal, and a legacy that stuck longer than a dinner guest who won't leave. Picture the scene. It's Passover week in Jerusalem, a city packed with pilgrims and tension. Jesus of Nazareth, rabbi, miracle worker, public nuisance depending on who you ask, gathers with his disciples. The air outside is thick with incense and imperial nerves. Inside, it's the calm before the storm. No political posturing, no serenading with flutes, just bread, broken, wine poured, and a strange sense that time itself is holding its breath. The awkwardness? Oh, it's there. Because Jesus opens the night by saying, more or less, one of you is going to betray me. That'll ruin the vibe faster than bad hummus. Cue the disciples looking around like they're in a murder mystery party, and someone just drew the killer card. Peter glares. Judas sweats. Everyone pretends to chew thoughtfully, while wondering if they might accidentally be the villain in this story. It's not so much a dinner party as a loaded confessional in real time. Now, there's no harpist in the corner, no jug of poisoned mare's milk, but the tension? You could slice it with a ceremonial knife meant for the lamb. Jesus takes bread, breaks it, and says, "This is my body." Now imagine someone doing that at your next potluck. See how quickly the hummus gets abandoned? Then he lifts the wine. "This is my blood." And everyone just nods. No one says, "Excuse me, what?" No one backs away from the cup. They're in it. Body, blood, and all. It's a strange intimacy. The most awkward dinner party in history, because it isn't just awkward, it's sacred. It's the moment before, the pause before the shatter, and every guest knows it. And let's not pretend Judas was subtle. He's sitting there, clutching his coin purse under the table, like a kid hiding snacks in church. When Jesus says, "Go do what you must," Judas just leaves. No dessert, no goodbye, just the quiet sound of sandals on stone, and betrayal drying on his conscience. That night, 12 men leave the room changed. One is about to deny he ever came. Another will not live past sunrise. The rest will scatter like breadcrumbs in the wind, hunted, haunted, and eventually honored. But that dinner, that was the hinge. Because meals have always done this. They hold meaning. They mark beginnings and endings. They say we are here together, one last time, before the world shifts. This one just happened to launch a theological revolution. No flaming swans, no wine-bloated emperors, no dancing monkeys. Just a story etched in millions of minds, 12 anxious friends, one impending betrayal, and a new ritual born from wine and worry. And still, awkward. Imagine sitting next to someone you know is going to turn you in, and still handing him bread. That's either divine grace or the most committed form of hospitality ever recorded. Let that sink in. The dinner that changed the world didn't end in laughter. It ended in silence, in footsteps, in prayers, mouthed into clay cups. But it didn't end alone. It ended with legacy. And legacy is a powerful season, because if you look back through history, every feast we've covered, every table we've hovered over, they weren't just about food. They were about people, broken people, proud people, drunk, emotional, desperate, petty people. And in that way, they weren't so different from us. We still gather, still toast, still wonder if we said the wrong thing, still cry into cheese, still laugh too hard, still share silence when words fail. Every dinner leaves a trace. Some leave legends, some leave revolutions, some just leave a trail of breadcrumbs and a memory of who we were when we sat down and who we became after we stood up. So here's to the awkward, the sacred, the absurd. Here's to every dinner party that changed history, and every one that almost did. If you made it through poisonings, puppet shows, and philosophers weeping into their wine, you deserve a proper toast. Like, subscribe, and stick around. Because history is never boring when it's awkward, a little murderous, and served with a side of existential dread. See you at the next bizarre chapter of human absurdity. Just, maybe skip the oyster course.